watching Gearz, brought to you by O'Reilly Auto Parts. Better parts, better prices every day.
Hey, welcome to Gearz. You know, a few weeks ago, we started a project called the Stunt Double, which is basically a modern, upgraded version of one of the most popular television vehicles of all time, the Fall Guy truck. Now, the purpose of this project wasn't just to convince you to go out and drive your vehicle like a stuntman, although that's part of it. Now, the main reason was to demonstrate what a great, affordable project these square-body Chevys are. So, starting with a well-worn, long bed 4x4, we tore into the interior and made it better than new. Now we come to the part that made the Fall Guy truck so unique. All of those crazy stunts it was able to do and never seemed to get a scratch in it. Until, of course, you looked at the footage closer and you saw axles bending and frames breaking and all that kind of stuff. Because these trucks were never meant to fly 30 feet in the air. But that doesn't mean they can't be built into a tough off-road machine capable of some really crazy stuff. You just have to fix the weak spots. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, to get the most out of your 80s 4x4 GM truck, you got to go to a place that truly understands these things. And Offroad Design has been wheeling these things for a long time, so they got them dialed in. Now, for the rear, we're going to go with new leaf springs and this shackle flip kit. Now, between the two of these, that's going to give us 6 inches of lift. Now, notice these leaf springs are a little different. They use 10 smaller leaves as opposed to 2 or 3 big, thick ones. Then they have urethane pads between each leaf, and then you have, of course, new urethane bushings for the ends. Now, this all works together to allow the spring to flex and move extremely well. This gives you a better ride on the highway and better articulation off-road. Problem 1 solved. Now, the shackle flip kit is going to get rid of that weak, weird design that GM had on the back of these trucks and put a nice, strong shackle on there. And it's going to allow you to use less arch in the spring to get that 6 inches of lift. Problem 2 solved. This is how to put them in. Now, if you're going to do a project like this, I strongly recommend that you take the bed off. Now, I know some of you guys are thinking, what? I got to take the bed off? What kind of a deal is that? Well, I didn't say you had to take the bed off. I just said I strongly recommend it. And you're going to find out why when we start messing with those rear shackles. Also, it's going to give you great access to the frame, the chassis, the fuel system, the shocks, everything. And you know that on a truck this old, that those old body mounts are shot. Now is the time to replace them. All right, with the bed out of the way, you can see that that gives us great access to not only the leaf spring bolts, but to anything else we may want to work on or fix back here. And I can see there is a lot. So we're going to get started by getting jack stands underneath the axle, taking off the rear tires, and then bolting those leaf springs. Now, I know this sounds easy, but don't let these old trucks fool you. They're going to fight you every step of the way. So be prepared to use a Sawzall to get rid of old exhaust systems, a cutoff wheel to remove rusty U-bolts, an impact wrench makes quick work of shackle bolts, and a big old pry bar will help you get the old shocks off. You can see now why I recommend that you remove the bed. All right, with the leaf springs out of the way, we are ready to deal with those rear shackles. Now, this whole bracket has got to come off, which means those rivets have got to go. Now, you can deal with those in several different ways. You can use a grinder, you can use a plasma cutter, you can use a torch, but the best way is to take an impact hammer, chisel off the heads, and punch out the rivet. And as you can see, we have got all kinds of room to work here with this bed off. And that's important because those rivets, those are going to fight you. Once the old brackets are gone, we're going to clean up the frame and hit it with some chassis saver paint. This stuff is designed to paint right over bare or rusty metal to seal it up and stop existing rust or to prevent any from starting. Now, once it's all dry, it's just a matter of mounting the new shackle brackets to the frame with the supplied hardware. Now, notice that the location of the new shackle is under the bracket, not above it like the stock one was. After that, it's just a matter of installing the new leaf springs and U-bolts and we got 6 inches of lift on the rear. Another problem area on these trucks is the rear upper shock mount. You're going to find a lot of cracked frames on these trucks. That's because the original shock mount is set up in a single shear configuration, and that puts all the pressure right here on the frame and causes it to crack. So Offroad Design came out with this slick little brace that not only spreads the load out across the frame, but also turns it into a double shear configuration. So that solves problem number 3. All right, while we're back here with the bed off, it's a perfect time to take care of some other issues that we found. For example, these brake lines were shot, and we have a leaky fuel tank on the passenger side. So we got some replacements from LMC Truck, and we're going to replace all this stuff before we put the bed back on. Hey, welcome back to Gearz, where we have just finished putting a 6-inch lift on the rear of the Stunt Double truck. Now, a 6-inch lift on an 86 Chevy truck is not exactly groundbreaking news. Heck, the original Fall Guy truck had that. But what is amazing is the fact that we've managed to fix 3 chronic problem areas that are on the rear of these trucks. So now we're going to move to the front, we're going to also put on the lift, and we're going to take care of some problem areas up here. Now, just like the rear, we're going to get our lift in the front by replacing the front leaf springs. So, with the truck up on the lift, we're going to get some jack stands under the axle to support it and get those leaf springs out of there. But before we do that, remember how I suggested taking the bed off made it easier to work on the rear? I've got a suggestion for the front. Take the hood and the inner fenders out. That's going to give you much better access to everything you're going to need to get to. Also, ours are rusty and need to be replaced anyway. All right, with everything disassembled, we come to the fun part, because just like on the back of the truck, these shackle hangers and these shock mounts have got to go, which means those rivet heads need to come off. So, out comes the air hammer and chisel again. Once everything's out of the way, we need to open up the factory holes in the frame to fit the new shackle hangers, and a plasma cutter is the best way to do this. After that, we'll use the hangers as a pattern to drill out the factory holes, then bolt the hangers in place, followed by the heavy-duty shackles. Finally, we'll bolt in the new leaf springs. Now, I know some of you guys are probably wondering, why did we cut off these upper shock mounts? Well, because they're weak. Problem number 4. Look at that thing. We're going to replace that with this super heavy-duty cut-to-fit upper shock mount. Also, the original shocks are pretty limited not only in their travel but in their performance. Problem number 5. Well, with the lift, we're now going to be able to run these Bilstein gas shocks that give us 14 inches of travel. Now, we're going to have to wait to mount the shocks because we need to get the truck down on the ground, get it at ride height, so we can establish where we're going to put these upper mounts. But this is going to take care of 2 big problems with the shocks on these trucks. Now, let's go talk about steering. All right, these old trucks have got some issues when it comes to steering. First of all, the original steering boxes are weak. That's problem number 6. Then this area back in behind the steering box on the frame, that is notoriously weak. They break all the time. They'll break if you sneeze on them. Problem number 7. And then finally, this funky drag link thing that GM designed, this push-pull thing, that is awful. You get this truck off-road, you start articulating this axle, that's going to bind up so bad that the truck will actually steer itself, but not in the direction that you're wanting to go. Here's how we're going to solve these problems. First, we're going to get rid of that stock steering box and bolt in this PSC high-performance steering box. Now, these are designed to handle hardcore off-roading and big tires, but they still run great down the highway. Now, this box is for a two-wheel drive truck. Now, the reason we've done that is because this completely reconfigures the steering to work in conjunction with this Offroad Design cross-steer conversion. Now, what all that means is that this steering box now is going to push this huge drag link side to side across the truck instead of front to back like you just saw stock. This gets rid of all of that binding we showed you, and it's way stronger. Now, to deal with the frame breakage issue, we also got one of these frame kits, and this braces back behind the steering box, triangulates everything, and keeps it to where your frame won't break and strengthens that area. So you've got 3 problems solved, and it's all bolt-in stuff. Hey, welcome back to Gearz and our suspension upgrades on the Stunt Double truck. Now, so far we have new leaf springs in the front, we have 6 inches of lift on here, and we took care of some design flaws in the steering and in the shock mounts. Now we come to one of the weakest points in the front of these trucks. That's this old 10-bolt axle. Now, it's not that the 10-bolt axle is a bad axle, it just had some weaknesses from the factory. But there's a lot of things you can do to them to make them a whole lot stronger, starting with these axle shafts. Okay, the stock axles and U-joints weren't the strongest from the factory. You get 30 years of use on them, they're just looking for a reason to break. So we're going to replace the stock axles with these chrome moly axle shafts from Yukon Gear. Now these are different in a lot of ways. Look at this. First of all, the diameter of the axle shaft. It's bigger all the way down. There's no step down like these originals, which made them weaker. Also, if you'll notice here in the U-joint ear, this is much bigger, much stronger. So this is a stronger axle shaft all the way down. Now, your axle shafts are only as good as the hubs that are locking them in. So we're going to get rid of what's left of these old plastic ones, and we're going to replace them with these Yukon Gear metal locking hubs. This is going to strengthen 3 major weak areas in the axle: the hubs, the U-joints, and the axle shafts. Another weak point on these axles are the steering knuckles, because they're just a cast piece and they're very easy to bend or break, as a lot of you have found out over the years. Now, the best thing to do with these is to chuck them and replace them with these Reed Racing heavy-duty knuckles. Now, look at the difference here. You can tell these are way stronger than the stock pieces. They have the stops already cast in, so you don't have to mess with this old funky adjustment here. And they are machined for the high steer or the crossover steer setup, so you're already good to go on that. Now, they come with ball joints and all the hardware, but they don't come installed. That's up to you. But before you start pounding on ball joints with a hammer, you need to go down to your local O'Reilly Auto Parts store and pick up one of these ball joint presses from their Loan-A-Tool program. That way you don't have to buy it. Now, as you can see, this tool utilizes a heavy frame and numerous adapters to allow you to easily drive a ball joint in or out using an impact hammer. Now, once the ball joint hits bottom, just install a snap ring and that's it. It's that easy, if you have the right tool. If you don't, you're never gonna get those ball joints in. All right, with the axle housing cleaned up and painted, we'll install the new knuckles. Then slide in the new axle shafts, followed by the spindles. Now we will add the crown jewel, the cross steer steering system. Now this is just a matter of bolting on the new steering arm to the new knuckle and then connecting the new drag link to the new steering box. Now notice this puts the drag link way above the leaf springs, up here out of the way, and it cross steers across the body. So this steering's not going to bind up if we get it articulating off-road. Now, if we were going to use the high steer option, we'll take a tie rod and connect it there and go over to the other knuckle. But since this isn't a rock crawler, we're not going to do that. We're going to use the stock location. But one of the benefits of these Reed knuckles is that they are not tapered from the bottom up, they are tapered from the top down. What this does is change the location of the tie rod from below the knuckle to on top of the knuckle to not only give us more ground clearance, but the close proximity of the tie rod to the leaf spring will help keep the tie rod from bending if you hit a big rock. This solves yet another problem of the 10-bolt axle, a vulnerable, easy-to-bend tie rod. Now, obviously, we've removed a lot of junk off this truck and replaced it with better stuff. But what about the parts we've cut off that we haven't talked about, like the exhaust system, or the rear brake cables, or the rear brakes, or the front brakes, the rotors, the calipers? How about the front steering stabilizer, all this stuff? Well, you don't necessarily need to upgrade this, but you do need to rebuild it or replace it if it's bad. And you will not find a better time to do that than when you've got everything apart. Now, the best place to find this kind of stuff is a specialty place like LMC Truck, because this is what they specialize in, old Ford, Chevy, and Dodge truck parts. And the longer these trucks are around, the older they get, the harder some of this stuff is to find, unless you got the right catalog.
Quick Tip, brought to you by E3 Spark Plugs, born to burn.
One of the most frustrating things that you have to deal with when you're working on an old vehicle is removing old rusty carriage bolts from a bed or a bumper. Because instead of breaking off, they usually round off the square corners underneath the head, and that allows the bolt to spin, and there is no way to grab that round head and keep it from spinning. But instead of reaching for the grinder and showering the shop with sparks, there's a better way. Just grab a drill and sink a hole roughly the diameter of the bolt in the center of the head. This will allow the head to easily break away so you can drive out the bolt with minimal damage to the surface and no grinding dust in your teeth. If you'd like to learn more tips to make your life easier in the shop, check out the tips page on the website.
Parts Bin, brought to you by AutomotiveTouchUp.com Touch-Up Paint. With a press of a button, you can restore your car's original paint.
You know, one problem that everybody faces when they're working in a shop is dealing with dirt and grease and oil, because it gets on your hands, it gets on the floor, man, it gets everywhere. And it's expensive to clean it up, don't kid yourself. You're going through boxes of rags and bottles of hand cleaner all the time. Well, the guys at Fast Orange have come up with a whole new way to clean up your mess. Check it out. First, they took some of the special oil-absorbing sponge that's used to clean up oil spills in the ocean. Then they crammed it full of their pumice bar soap particles. We've done it! We've done it! Now, the result of this crazy experimentation is what they call the grime magnet. Now, this is basically a sponge that will clean up the dirtiest, nastiest hands or absorb grease and oil like, well, a magnet. Now, the way it works, the pumice and hand cleaner cut and remove the grime, and the sponge sucks it deep inside and never lets it out again. No matter how hard you squeeze, the oil goes in, but not out. This allows you to use the sponge over and over and over again until it's completely saturated with dirt and oil and grease. Then you just toss it and start over with another one, which means this little grime magnet will basically do the work of a whole box of rags and several bottles of hand cleaner. I know it sounds crazy, but it actually works really well. And the only place that you're going to find this is Fast Orange.
What are you working on? Brought to you by Woodward Fabrication, selling quality metalworking equipment since 1966.
Today's What Are You Working On is about a 1951 Crosley Super Sport and a guy named Bruce and his son Rick in Farmingdale, Maine. Now, Bruce is 80 years old, and he said he got bored after he retired a couple years ago. a couple years ago he retired. This is a pretty amazing guy here. And he said so he picked up this Crosley and he started restoring it with the help of his son Rick. Check it out. Now as you can see, the car was completely torn apart and stripped to bare metal, and every system was gone through. The fuel tank and the lines, the brakes, the electrical system, and of course the 4-cylinder engine and the 4-speed transmission were rebuilt as well. Now the paint and the upholstery was also done by Bruce and Rick, and the mint green color is actually a factory Crosley color. Now they say that the little Crosley is slated to be done this summer, but it's already given the whole family a ton of memories. Now how do we know this? Because this what he's working on was submitted by the granddaughter, Gabrielle, and she's been watching her dad and her grandfather build this car and loving every minute of it. So, to recognize such a great project that has encompassed a whole family, we hooked up with our buddies at Woodward Fab. We're going to give you one of these big bench vices that can help you out on your next project or to finish that Crosley. Also, we're going to give you one of our project planning books. That way you'll be able to keep track of everything you've done to that car. Also, we're going to give you one of our Gearz t-shirts. Matter of fact, we're going to give you one for the father, one for the grandfather, and we might as well give one to Gabrielle too. And finally, we're going to give you an O'Reilly gift card to help offset some of the costs you might be putting into that car. Now, the rest of you guys, if you want to get in on this, get your vehicle featured on the show, got to go to the website, go to Gearz Nation, go to What Are You Working On, and submit your project. The website's also the place to find out more information on any products you may have seen on the show, any Gearz merchandise, and how to join Gearz Nation so you can stream any of our episodes commercial free. Finally, don't forget to like us on Facebook so you can get some behind the scenes footage of our weekly web series, Shifting Gears. All right, that wraps it up for us today. I've got plenty to do on the Stunt Double truck, which means it's time for you to get out there and jump into a project of your own. We'll see you next time.